Hello there, survivors and friends, and welcome back to episode 9 of
Concept Limbo,
the series where all of your fantasies become reality and anything is truly possible as long as it involves shattered dreams, crushed hopes, and slightly disturbing images of mutant poultry. This is the second part of a segment dedicated to Rust's magical not-so-great outdoors, and in the previous episode I explored such on-hold ideas as sandstorms, dead whales, underwater swimming pools, and execution chambers. In making this series, I've come to appreciate the sheer mountain of unused ideas that litter the path of Rust's development, and sorting through them has been a monumental task. Talking of which, we're mainly going to be looking at monuments in this episode. But what exactly is one when it's at home? Well, when Rust was rebooted as a departure from the days of the legacy version, it was planned that the game would feature a procedurally generated landscape that would more than likely be very different from server to server. This had some obvious advantages in that there'd be a shed load more choice when it came to the shape and layout of your island home, but an important sacrifice had to be made on the altar of variety in order to accomplish this. You see, the original Rust Island was like a pair of well-worn knickers, familiar, comfortable, and you knew where the gusset was. There was a ring road with various distinctive towns and buildings strung around its girth, and within seconds of spawning in you were aware of exactly where you were and where you needed to go. You knew, for instance, that Big Rad was the perfect place if you wanted to be KOS'd by clans in Kevlar. Each new procedurally generated map, however, was more like a brand new pair of Hessian underpants. It chafed at first, took a while to break in, and there was a certain amount of exploration involved until you knew your way around its nooks and crannies. With each new server visited came the question, where am I? And so, dear viewer, this is where monuments entered the fray. Prefabricated landmarks that could be procedurally placed on the freshly generated landscape to help nakeds navigate their way to success with an exciting blend of naturism and orienteering. At first, these were limited to what I've affectionately named the Temples of Wolfius, giant wolf statues where humans could meet up and compare the size of their rocks. In time, though, they were replaced, sadly, and their complement grew to include our current list of dungeons, such as the Sphere Tank, Power Plant, and Airfield. It wasn't just from within the Face Punch team that ideas for monuments originated though, and indeed our first for this episode came from the player base. So come with me to 10th of February 2015, where on community update number 27, this piece of artwork by illustrator and Rust mega fan Frank Walls was featured. Now, we've seen Frank's concept work several times already in this series in the form of chainsaws, junk on the landscape, and the deadly Radigator, but this time he produced something more beautiful and mysterious in the shape of what he called the Bridge to Rustware. As Craig, who wrote the blog, explained, it's a concept for a bridge leading to or away from Rust Islands, a structure that players could use in-game as a platform to fight on, defend, and perhaps even build on. It's also telling a story. As you can see, the bridge existed out at sea. Where did that bridge lead to? Good question! If you've watched my mind map episode, you'll know that one possible plan slated for Rust was to link all servers together and enable transitioning between them via sea. Although you'd need the mother of all bridges if this were the case, I'm sure a ferry service would be far cheaper. Just keep Frank's idea in the back of your minds now, because if we fast forward only a couple of days to the 12th of February and pay the Rust Trello boards a visit, we find that Howie at Facepunch started posting concept art for none other than bridges. Now, this could either have been a mahoosive coincidence or Frank's idea had genuinely started something, because over the next few weeks the team jumped on the concept like a rabid panther and artwork began to flow. Then on Devblog 50 in March we were shown the first iteration of basic bridges that would allow roads to cross rivers. These were rather low-key affairs though, to be honest, and nothing approaching the height or size of Frank's original concept art. But then, just over a month later on Devblog 56, Scott at Facepunch surprised us with some rather sexy pictures. No, not that kind. I mean these, and this is what he had to say. Up until now, most of the monuments have been one-shot deals, the lighthouse, the radio telescope, and only really existed to give the players landmarks to help with navigation. With the new bridges, the idea is to add something that players can interact with and possibly change. You should be able to build your base on top of bridges, and you should be able to repair gaps and then try and charge people to cross, or hide underneath like a troll. I've got the game meshes finished, and I'm going to get them in-game with collision, so everyone can check them out. Sounds promising, doesn't it? Especially the idea of building on a monument, something that was actually possible once, but has long since been confiscated from us. Well, after this initial flurry of excitement, it all went quiet until nearly 3 months later, things started to happen again, this time on Twitter. Tweets began to pop up left, right and centre about new bridge sections being added, and then, finally on devblog number 70, Scott gave us an update on his progress. So, the first set of bridges are nearly done. There are currently 10 pieces which all work together to give us loads of variety. We can place a long chain of broken bridge sections and columns along a path to help with navigation, but we also want you to be walking through a forest and stumble across a single column or foundation block. Huzzah! except that was the last we ever heard of them, and I don't know what happened. They were in the process of being inserted into the game, but then at the last moment, the team pulled out. Well, actually, that's not 100% true. If you pay a visit to the Savas Island map, you will actually see 4 of the single pillars right in the middle of the map, standing like lonely tombstones to a once great idea. Coincidentally, you'll also find the searchlight here, although it has a mind of its own. Oh, and blue crystals. Remember those? Anyway, I'm not going to get hung up about these, just as I'm trying not to get hung up about the dead whale, or handcuffs, or electricity, or the hacksaw melee weapon, or any of the other conceptual carrots that have been dangled in front of our faces over the months. So, moving swiftly on, whatever Rust's backstory is, and that, rest assured, is the subject of a future episode in itself, it left behind a lot of clues in the form of ruins and remnants which give evidence of Rusty shenanigans from days gone by. For instance, the island itself seems to contain an almost limitless wealth of valuable resources both above and below the ground. With that in mind, what do you think to this concept art for an excavator monument from the back end of 2014? Something that could possibly be fixed and used to harvest resources quickly. Sound familiar? Aye, methinks this was actually the precursor of our deployable quarries and pump jacks, which pretty much do the same thing now, but without having to be repaired. Another possible bit of tech that could be reconditioned was illustrated in this collection of rather inefficient looking solar panels from around the same time. Of course, we've already covered the subject of electricity, but if you're a bright spark, then you surely wouldn't say no to a bit of free energy, would you? And then we have these curious ingredients, intriguingly entitled Mini Magnesite Works. But what the flagnog is a Magnesite Works, mini or otherwise, and what does it do? Well, I grabbed my Deerstalker, magnifying glass and bottle of absinthe, and after doing some research, I found these pictures of a larger scale facility in Hartlepool, England, that was built during World War II to extract magnesia from seawater. The resulting precipitate was then used in a wide range of applications, including lining blast furnaces, making aircraft components, flares, incendiary bombs, and pie cases. Okay, so not the last one, but photos of this now abandoned place look amazing, really post-apocalyptic, so I can see why it was chosen as a monument. But the question is, could these have been a way to get a possible new higher tier resource, or was this monument suggested merely for its aesthetics? Nothing more was done with it, so maybe we'll never know. Another idea for a remnant from Rust's shady past, again from the end of 2014, when so much brainstorming seems to have been done, was this, the facility. Sinister by name, probably pretty sinister by nature. I mean, it's not likely to be a cake shop, is it? But what was it for? Experimentation? Imprisonment? Observation? The record is silent. We're going to come full circle now, because the idea that perhaps we Newmans are captives of some kind in a grand social experiment was also explored by our friend Frank Walls at about the same time as the Bridge to Rustware. Here are some of his scrawlings of a special monument he called the Panopticon. I'll let him explain what it was supposed to be. I saw it mentioned somewhere that Rust Island might be a prison. This was something I thought about when playing Legacy, and was one of the backstory ideas I thought about. So what if it was a prison? Perhaps at one time it would have actually been staffed by people that watched over the island, even if all they did was watch and collect data about what the prisoners did. Over time, maybe the prisoners banded together, breached the walls of this panopticon, and took control of the island. Interestingly, a panopticon, which is Greek for all-seeing, was an actual concept for a type of prison dreamt up as far back as the 18th century. The idea was that a central watchman could potentially observe any of the prisoners in their cells from the one position. There was nowhere to hide for the inmates, and without knowing whether they were being watched, they would have to act as if they were being watched all of the time, effectively controlling their behaviour and giving them clenched arse cheeks 24 hours a day. In keeping with that thought, did you know that the name Hapis is actually Turkish for prison? So maybe there is some truth in this assertion. And if Rust is a prison, does this make the admins prison wardens? What do you think? And indeed, how do you feel about all of the concepts we've looked at in this episode? Leave me a comment down below. In the next part, I'm going to continue my journey through Rust's landscape with a ton more concept art, so make sure you subscribe and give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this one. Don't be a stranger, come and pay me a visit on Twitch, Twitter, Facebook and Steam, and I shall catch you all soon. In the meantime, stay rusty. Cheerio.